This is the scariest horror movie I have ever watched. Director James Wan perfectly captures the essence of true American horror through this film. Even to this day, it remains an unrivaled, classic masterpiece and is recognized as one of the top 10 scariest horror movies in the world. Dead Silence. Are you ready? It is said that in the 6th century BC, there was an ancient legend that claimed the souls of the dead could send messages through the abdomen of the living. People with this ability were called voice givers. However, because this practice was so strange and terrifying, anyone who attempted to communicate with spirits in this way inevitably met a gruesome death. Until the year 1940, a woman named Mary Shaw slightly modified this technique, bringing the legend back to life. For Mary, the key principle of this technique was to speak without moving her mouth, using abdominal resonance to produce sound. This allowed her face to remain completely still while her voice was still heard. This technique eventually became an unprecedented form of art. However, for some unknown reason, the residents of the town suddenly started dying one after another in a short period. What was even more horrifying was that their deaths all followed the same pattern. Their tongues were brutally ripped out, and they died in an agonizing manner. Even now, the killings continue to repeat, as if the town is cursed by some terrible force. To save themselves, a newlywed couple decided to flee from the town overnight. They believed that by leaving, they could escape the curse. But shortly after moving, they received a mysterious package with no return address. When they opened it, they found an elegant yet eerily unsettling doll. Xiaomei, the wife, thought that since they did not have children yet, she might as well keep the doll and experience the joy of motherhood in advance. She never imagined that this small decision would bring unimaginable disaster upon them. After Xiao Shui, the husband, left to buy roasted duck, heavy rain started falling. Worried that their new child might get cold, Xiaomei thoughtfully took a blanket from the wardrobe. But just as she turned back, she suddenly noticed something chilling. The doll that had been lying on the bed had turned its head and was staring straight at her. Instead of being scared, Xiaomei actually smiled. She assumed that her child must have felt her care. Without hesitation, she approached the doll and gently covered it with a white blanket. Then she walked over to the mirror, stuffed a towel under her clothes, and imagined herself being pregnant. Just as she was admiring her reflection, a melodic tune suddenly echoed through the room. Xiaomei assumed that her husband had returned, so she went to the living room to check. But when she arrived, there was no one there. The sound had actually come from the radio. Before she could process the strange occurrence, the music abruptly stopped. Then, the clock in the house began to sway mysteriously, and the kettle in the kitchen suddenly started boiling on its own. Seeing such an eerie scene, Xiaomei began to suspect that everything might be related to the doll. Sure enough, things picked up from nowhere should never be kept. Terrified, she cautiously returned to the bedroom to check the doll. But the next second, she suddenly fell to the ground and vomited a large amount of blood. Just as she tried to get up, an evil force instantly pulled her into the room. A few minutes later, Xiao Shui returned home with the roasted duck. As soon as he turned on the lights, he was horrified to see the floor covered in blood. Xiaomei's eerie voice echoed throughout the house. Fearing for his wife's safety, Xiao Shui rushed into the room, only to find that Xiaomei was missing. Instead, there was a white cloth draped over something on the sofa. He carefully lifted the cloth, and what he saw shocked him to his core. To his horror, in just 2.5 hours, his wife had died a gruesome death. Her tongue had been ripped out, and on the floor beside her lay the sinister doll. At that moment, Xiao Shui realized that his wife must have fallen victim to the town's curse. But what puzzled him was, they had already left the town. So why was the curse still following them? Determined to find answers, he immediately returned to the town to investigate the origins of the curse. Upon arriving at his family's luxurious mansion, he met with his father and stepmother. He asked them about the legend of the curse, but his father, who was now old and frail, could no longer remember much of the past. He had become like a lifeless doll, constantly being cared for by his stepmother. From his stepmother, Xiao Shui finally learned the truth. The curse was connected to Mary Shaw. Years ago, Mary Shaw was a famous ventriloquist who always performed with her beloved puppet, Billy. Since she never had children, she treated Billy as her own son, carrying him everywhere for performances. However, during one of her shows, a child in the audience suddenly shouted, "I can see your lips moving." The entire audience shuddered. But not because Mary's trick had been exposed. Rather, because everyone in town knew that Mary never had children. Mary's inability to have children was the deepest pain in her heart. She never allowed anyone to mention it. That was why she created Billy, treating him as her child and using her ventriloquism to give him life. But the innocent child, unaware of her pain, had accidentally exposed something that should never have been spoken. A few days after the performance, the boy mysteriously disappeared. The townspeople immediately suspected Mary. They believed she had killed the child as revenge. Before continuing with the next part of the story, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated and never miss out. Enraged, they stormed her home, captured her, and cut out her tongue before killing her. But before she died, Mary, filled with hatred, used her ancient ventriloquist skills to place a curse on Billy, ordering him to exact revenge on the town. She wanted Billy to rip out the tongues of everyone who had wronged her and turn them into dolls. From that moment on, anyone Mary set her sights on, child or adult, would inevitably die a horrifying death. Now, the only way to stop the curse was for Xiao Shuai to return Billy to where he belonged. Without hesitation, Xiao Shuai took Billy and drove to the town's cemetery. It was said that Mary and Billy's graves were buried there. After searching for a while, Xiao Shuai finally found Billy's tombstone, but when he dug it up, he was stunned. The coffin was empty. At that moment, Xiao Shuai was certain that Mary was behind everything. However, what he still could not understand was, his wife had never even been in that town. So why did Mary target her? But before he could find an answer, a terrifying figure suddenly appeared behind him. The sudden reappearance of Billy left Xiao Shuai feeling utterly confused. He had clearly buried it, so how could it appear again? Xiao Shuai thought he was hallucinating. After some time, he went home. However, shortly after washing his hair, he was shocked to find Billy suddenly sitting in his chair again. And next to him sat a policeman. Because Xiao Mei died without any clear reason and there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, Ah Wei couldn't find any other suspects, so he made Xiao Shuai the prime suspect. Ah Wei then followed Xiao Shuai to the graveyard and dug up the recently buried doll. Ah Wei's actions left Xiao Shuai completely bewildered. He should have been able to resolve this issue smoothly, but now everything was in chaos. However, to find out why Mary killed his girlfriend, Xiao Shuai finally found the theater where Mary used to perform after asking around. After many years, the place had become a ruin. The old, fragile building stood by the river, shrouded in thick fog, with strange noises echoing everywhere and rats scurrying across the floor. In the quiet and desolate midnight, the atmosphere was incredibly eerie. Yet Xiao Shuai still carried his oil lantern and carefully walked towards the theater. Not long after he began walking, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He quickly turned around and saw that Ah Wei was still following him. Seeing this, Xiao Shuai told Ah Wei that Xiao Mei's killer was here. However, Ah Wei did not believe him and pointed his gun at Xiao Shuai. But what happened next made Ah Wei unable to not believe. After hearing Xiao Shuai's explanation, both their hearts raced, and Ah Wei finally believed Xiao Shuai's words. Eventually, they went from being enemies to allies and carefully walked into the theater. The deeper they went, they found a room filled with dolls. Under the lantern's light, the dolls looked incredibly creepy, as if they might come to life at any moment. Ah Wei also found another doll on the floor. He picked it up and said to Xiao Shuai, "If I see one more of these dolls..." As the curtain slowly fell, thousands of dolls appeared before them. They were shocked and couldn't imagine that after the town was cursed by Mary, this woman had created so many works. From the shape of the red cloth, it seemed like there was something inside. Seeing this, Ah Wei immediately got ready, and Xiao Shuai carefully walked over. When he lifted the red cloth, he was horrified to find that it was a human skin doll dressed in a suit. Ah Wei, curious, slowly walked over to take a closer look. The next second it said, "It's me, all right, I get it." The two planned to continue their investigation. But after taking a few steps, Xiao Shuai accidentally noticed that the dolls seemed to be moving. The other dolls in the cabinets also suddenly came to life, one after another, looking in one direction. Seeing this, the two were terrified. They followed the doll's gaze and saw a clown doll with a fierce face in the darkness. Xiao Shuai tentatively called out, "Mary Shaw!" The doll actually stopped. Hearing the doll's voice, the two were scared and retreated. But for the sake of his wife, Xiao Shuai mustered the courage to approach Mary and ask why she killed Xiao Mei. Mary replied, "Come closer and I will tell you." Ah Wei immediately guessed that this was Mary's trap, but Xiao Shuai, unable to think clearly, slowly approached Mary. "You were the last action." The last action was this idea. Suddenly, a terrifying, eerie laugh echoed throughout the theater. Before they could react, a pair of ghostly hands suddenly covered the doll's head and slowly lifted it. Seeing this horrifying sight, their hearts trembled with fear, and they seemed to have forgotten to run away. They watched as a 3-meter-long tongue slowly extended from the doll's head. The real Mary was hiding behind the doll. To stop Mary from harming others, Ah Wei immediately raised his shotgun and blasted her to pieces. However, the next second, Mary suddenly possessed another doll. Seeing this, Ah Wei raised his shotgun again and destroyed it. But soon after, Mary appeared in another doll. Realizing that as long as the dolls existed, Mary could never be destroyed, they understood that they couldn't kill all the dolls with just one shotgun. In a moment of crisis, Xiao Shuai had a sudden idea and threw his oil lamp, burning all the dolls. However, even though they set the entire theater on fire, the doll named Billy had already been dug up by Ah Wei and placed in Xiao Shuai's home. This seemed to indicate that Mary had not been truly destroyed. As they walked out, the suspension bridge suddenly collapsed, and Ah Wei fell. In his panic, a ghostly figure appeared before him and pulled out his tongue. Seeing Ah Wei's tragic death, Xiao Shuai realized that as long as someone opened their mouth, Mary would pull out their tongue. so he kept his mouth tightly shut and carefully climbed up. The next second, Xiao Shui reacted quickly and avoided being killed by Mary. He rushed home as fast as he could to burn Billy. Just as he found Billy and Mary was about to pull out his tongue, Xiao Shui quickly picked up Billy and threw him into the furnace. As the flames grew, Mary let out a terrifying scream and finally disappeared from Xiao Shui's home. However, the crisis didn't seem to be completely over. After Mary disappeared, Xiao Shui went to visit his father, only to find that his father had already become a corpse. Instinctively stepping back, he saw a horrifying sight. Half of his father's body was just a pile of bones, with all the internal organs removed. Seeing this, Xiao Shui felt a chill down his spine. He recalled recent events and finally understood that he had been trapped by Mary from the beginning. Mary had first possessed his stepmother, hollowed out his father's body, and then sent Billy to his home. She used her ventriloquism to control his father, pushing him step by step into the abyss. Now who's the real deal? Alright, that's the end of today's story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell at the end of the video so you won't miss any other exciting stories.